If you
No mosquitoes.
no mosquitoes. If you have a Bible and find it helpful, please turn in it to the book of the Revelation, chapter 21. This is where we're going to spend our time. As we move through the world as believers, I don't care who we are. All of us have points of prejudice toward people in certain ways. We all do. We dismiss certain people. We think of certain people as lesser. We look down upon people because of cultural differences, racial differences, participation differences, all kinds of differences. We just say, we label people. I have. I mean, we label somebody a ne'er-do-well because of whatever in their life that has caused them to be where they are, and we look at them and we say, why can't you do better? But the problem with all that is God doesn't dismiss anybody, ever. Nobody is beyond God's reach. So let's take a look at this text in the Revelation from John and see what it would teach us. It's Revelation chapter 21, verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had ceased to exist, and there was no more sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, made ready like a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, the residence of God is among human beings. He will live among them. They will be his people, and God will be with them. He'll wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. No more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, for the former things have ceased to exist. And the one seated on the throne said, Look, I am making all things new. Then the one on the throne said, Write this down, because these words are faithful and true. He said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the one who is thirsty, I will give water free of charge from the spring of the water of life. The one who conquers will inherit these things. I will be his God, and he will be my child. I've used this text at every funeral I have ever done. Every one of them. And even if I'm called, as I was with a recent one, just to do the graveside, this is the text. And there are reasons for that. One of them is I believe it. That's the first reason. If it were just something nice to say, I wouldn't be so prone to use it, but I do believe it. And secondly, I use it because of the promise that it holds out. And it is a deep promise. I was sitting with somebody 2 weeks ago, or well, a week ago Friday, let's put it that way, for whom the period of life has come to them wherein they are starting to reflect on the fact that the end of life is near, a lot nearer than it was only a few years ago. They're at the stage of life where they've said, as many do, I've reached that point at which there's more behind me than there is in front of me. And they're very much closer to that point in their life. And so the end of life has become a looming reality for them, far greater than it was. I mean, it's hard when you're 25 or 30 to really think about it, to even consider it. I mean, it seems so far off, so distant. But then this person to whom I was speaking was also relating to me the fact that as they look ahead, they see things in their life that indicate to them there might be, even before that point comes where they leave this world, a loss of independence, a loss of living the life that I would like to live. And if Jesus doesn't come back, that goes for every person in this room, right? I see this text as absolutely concomitant with the flood text, and I'll tell you why. Both texts are deeply reflective of the fact that God has given humanity freedom. The flood is a direct outgrowth of human freedom. That's why the flood took place, is because human freedom exercised itself in such a way that humans became so corrupt that God saw no alternative but to wipe out the entirety of the human race, save the one family. That was the only corrective that he could see that would be corrective of the problem. This passage in the book of the Revelation is exactly the same in that sense. There is a point coming at which all that God wants to fulfill in human history will be fulfilled, and that the cosmos is going to be remade. Now, the flood remade the human race and everything in it, but it left us in the same condition we were prior to the flood, only the bulk of the corruption was eliminated. But it didn't change us as individuals. We still are prone to corruption. But there's going to come a point at which God will remake the entire cosmos completely. So what are the characteristics of the remaking with regard to this text in the book of the Revelation? Well, it's total. It's just total. The whole world will once again be as it was intended to be, and the God of this world will actually be God. That's a big change. I mean, Jesus and Paul both speak of the fact, we love that hymn, "This is my Father's world." I don't like that hymn because it's not. God says it himself. Jesus, God in the flesh, says, "The God of this world comes and finds nothing in me." Paul says the God of this world has blinded people such that they can't hear the gospel. When God restores everything, the God who is God will be God once again.
Praise God.
Thank the Lord for that. There'll never be any more curse. Now, I don't know if you want to know what that means. Go back and read the first 3 chapters of Genesis, especially focusing on chapter 3, and you will see what the curse entails. Every relationship is disrupted in the curse. Every one of them. The relationship humans have with God, the relationship humans have with each other, the relationships humans have to the environment, the relationship the environment has to itself. Every relationship is disrupted in the curse. Every one of them. We're not even comfortable in ourselves because of the curse. There's a disruption, a fragmentation within us because of the curse. But then, when it's restored, all that's going to be set right. The curse will be undone. There'll be no nation. Think of that. No nations. Just one people. There'll be God and his people. One nation. More about that in just a minute. That's what it means when it says a new heavens and a new earth. Think about that phrase, new heavens and new earth. There's nothing else there is. There is nothing else. The new heavens and the new earth encompasses the entirety of the physical reality in which we live. It's going to be remade. Now, what's significant about this text is that a Jew is writing this. Very significant. You look at Peter's trajectory. Go back to the book of Acts. Peter has the dream. Peter recognizes now that something's different. God's communicating to him that things are going to be different now. And so Peter is sent to Cornelius' house, a Gentile, and Peter does something that no Jew was supposed to do. He walks across the threshold of the Gentile's house and enters it. When Peter does that, he comes back to Jerusalem and has to explain himself to the other believers there, James and John and all the rest. What are you doing? Crossing the threshold of a Gentile. What are you doing? Visiting the home of a Gentile. What are you doing bringing the gospel to a Gentile? I mean, all of these are real questions for them. Peter had to come back and make the apologia, that is, a defense for what he'd done. He had to explain to them. And there's this huge insight that Peter has been given, and that is that God says nothing is unclean any longer. Revelation is the culmination of this globally. It's the culmination of it cosmically. If you were to go around the country today, and just think about this for a moment, if you were to go around the country and survey every Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestant congregation on the planet, how many of them would say they are welcoming the idea that they are going to be now Israel?
No.
How many would welcome that? But that's exactly what the text says. Where are we going to live? The New Jerusalem. Where's Jerusalem? That's what the text is saying. There'll be no distinction any longer. Now, that's a very interesting statement, because one of the things that we strive after in our lives, you hear this all the time, We want to be what we would say is colorblind relative to racial differences. That is totally wrong. Totally wrong. God made the colors. Being colorblind is to be something even God can't be. He's not colorblind. He looks at a person from East India who's got medium pecan colored skin and he likes that look. He looks at somebody that comes from Ireland with their rosy red cheeks and pink skin and he likes that look. He looks at somebody with thin curly hair, thick curly hair, and he likes that look. He looks at somebody with long straight hair and he likes that look. He looks at somebody with almond shaped eyes, he likes that look. He looks at somebody with narrower eyes as an Asian whose skin might be kind of a tannish beige, he likes that look. He likes all these looks. So to say be colorblind is absolutely wrong. What God is going to do when he sets it right is you and I will then suddenly have our eyes open to appreciate these differences like God appreciates them. They're good things. They're not differences in terms of quality. They're differences because God likes differences. That's all. I wonder how many of us are ready in our heart to become Israel. I just wonder about that with all the things that have been said through history about the Jews by people that you and I might say are good people. I wonder. So this implies that something will be made right that is completely wrong with us right now. All of us. And there are a lot of barriers to this. Think about it. We've got a war going on in Ukraine. You've got a war going on in Syria. You've got warfare going on in the Sudan. You've got various tribal skirmishes going on all over Africa. What's going on? Well, people are fighting over land. People are fighting over resources in the land. People are fighting over ethnic divisions. People fight over tribal divisions. Or people fight over wealth. Or people just go to the good old let's conquer somebody kind of notion. All of these reasons. And what happens when warfare takes place? Well, things get torn up and people die. People go through. I was sitting at my computer 2 or 3 weeks ago whenever this thing in Ukraine started to really happen. And there was a picture of this beautiful old building in Ukraine. I don't know how old the building was. It was probably not built last week. All kinds of ornate stonework, cornices, and everything carved out of stone that were all over the face of this building. And it showed a picture of it. And then all of a sudden this street came in and the whole front of the building blew off. A rocket had been shoved into that building and it had just blown the face off the building. How many hundreds of hours? Some of those buildings in Europe, there are houses in Europe you can go right now and they're 500 years old. How old was that building? I don't know. But were there people inside it? In a nanosecond, all the work that was poured in that building was evaporated. Years. And there were people inside whose lives were completely destroyed or changed in a radical way in a nanosecond as well. And what is the result of war besides people dying and things getting torn up? Usually subjugation and terror. That's usually the result. So this is the history of humanity, and it's just going to continue. It's not going to change unless Jesus comes back. I mean, it doesn't matter what, like we looked at in Sunday school today in Mere Christianity, it doesn't matter what treaty gets signed. What's going to happen? Well, the people that signed the treaty, they eventually die or get shoved out of office, and somebody else comes along and says, we don't like that treaty. And so they renege on the treaty. And it just gets replaced. I mean, look at the history of Israel. The greatest king Israel ever knew is not David, in my view. It's Hezekiah. Hezekiah restored everything. He came in and he wiped out the paganism. He wiped out all the high places of pagan worship. He restored the Torah. He restored the place of the prophet in the overall government. He did everything right. And then he had a son who came right behind him and tore it all up. Just like that. In one generation. Peter says to Cornelius, God has shown me I can call no one unclean. And this is a gigantic earth-shattering change that has come to Judaism through the gospel. Paul, the Pharisee, says, neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, all are one in Christ Jesus. That's not Paul. That's not Paul as a Pharisee, the Pharisee Saul from Tarsus. That's Paul the apostle who's been completely turned upside down by the gospel. And this change is not easy for any of us. We all have points of human prejudice. Every one of us in this room. I do, we all do. And there's always going to be somebody that we look at who we see as lesser. Somehow. We think about it in terms of our government. We look at our government, we say our government is the best government on earth. Maybe. Maybe it is. What are the characteristics we point to when we look at how our government takes place, how our governance is orchestrated? Think of it this way. Any government that does not account for the natural condition of the human being is flawed. But every government is flawed because there are natural conditions of the human being that every government overlooks. Let me just take a little journey here through governmental systems and see what you think about these reflections here. Take a totalitarian regime. What's wrong with a totalitarian regime? It doesn't consider the natural condition of human freedom. That's what's wrong with it. It has to overcome that. It has to overlook that and orchestrate its governance in a way that does not account for that. What about a capitalist system? A marketplace system like our system? It doesn't account for human weakness. There are people who cannot function in this society as it is orchestrated. It's not that they don't want to, they can't. They're just not wired that way. And that's where you see the tragedy in some regards that I'd say 95% of the people in our culture who make their livings doing something they'd rather not do. That's a flaw. A socialist system is flawed because it doesn't account for human sin. It says that everybody's just getting better and better in every way and every day. And so if we just get the right system of distribution of wealth, that we can make a utopia here on this earth, we can have heaven on earth. But it doesn't account for human sin. There's always going to be somebody who's going to want more. I don't want to work as a doctor and get paid the same as a street sweeper. Right? I want to be able to achieve something. A human monarchy is flawed because it doesn't account for the fact that we are all the same. No birthright makes anybody better than another person. But a monarchy says because you're born into this family, you're better than everybody and you should be able to call the shots for everybody around you. So there's a flaw there. A communist system does not account for human aspiration, that there are people who just are naturally born to achieve things. And the communist system says it doesn't matter that you're born to achieve. It doesn't matter that you've achieved. You're going to get the same as everybody else. So you're punished for being an achiever. A radical egalitarian system, which is one we really are straining toward in our own culture right now, very popular persuasion, it doesn't account for the fact that we have limitations. Everybody can't just do everything they want all the time. Just can't happen. Somebody's going to get hurt. A blended society, which is again one of the features of our society, is flawed. Even though we're trying to accommodate everybody, we don't have a dominant ethos. There's no thing overarching us that says this is the main thing we strive after. If we're a blended society, every ethos is good. There are no bad ideas. A no-risk society, which is another very appealing thing in our culture. What's the welfare system for? It's to remove risk. What's the bankruptcy law for? It's to remove risk. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying a no-risk society strips away the natural propensity to have desires for things. So what's left? Nothing. There is nothing left. Every human system of governance is flawed in some way because it's made up of humans, and we're flawed. So what's the remedy? There is none, humanly speaking. There is no remedy. Henry Kissinger said this so well. He said, "We must work as though our state will last forever, even though we absolutely know it will not." Jesus said at the Last Supper, "You are to love one another as I have loved you." There's an ethos that we can get behind. There's an ethos that will erase the flaws, but we're not capable of it. How did Jesus love us? He gave himself for us. That's how he loved us. So we're stuck. We have no human solution to our problems. Why is there such a tension over nationhood right now? Why are borders important? They're important so that it keeps us from eating each other up. It's about the best guarantee we have that we won't just eat each other up. But nationhood is not God's way. It is not. There will come a day when the nations are gone and there'll be only one. Scottish pastor Alexander White said this, and there are a lot of things he said I don't agree with, but this is one good thing he did say. He said to his congregation, he said, so I'll pretend I'm him. Would we be willing, all of us, to take a napkin and write on it every person, political party, denomination, nation, church, politician, culture that we don't like? And that we would say of this list, these are those whom we cannot love. And then would we take that list and show it to God and say, I'm not even going to try? No, we'd probably be very uncomfortable doing that in God's presence. But don't we do that in secret all the time? Haven't we? Look at the Bible and look at what it shows us. It shows me, and hopefully all of us, that God enjoys saving very unlikely people. He loves it. C.S. Lewis said it well. We'll see it in the book. If we could see people the way God sees them. If we could see people the way God sees them, we'd be tempted when we saw them to fall down in front of them and worship them. That's how God sees us. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question,